Still, Sophia, I suppose part of the problem will be, and this is based merely on anecdotal evidence that I've gathered, my GP surgeries are actually pretty good at getting you in if you need to be seen. But I know people who are waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks to get in for a GP appointment. And if you're confronted with that, sometimes you might just give it a swerve.
Yeah, I mean, this is really sort of while you were sleeping pandemic edition. And, we're sort of coming to the hangover of the pandemic, which, I don't think anyone's really looking forward to, given how tough the past year has been. But, as the pandemic has obviously sort of completely obscured everything in our lives, in our society, in our economy, that there have been plenty of other things going on. And I think, as you say, as soon as you put up barriers to going to the doctor, it becomes very difficult to get people back into the system. And I think, that people are very trepidatious about going into the doctor. People have been made to feel afraid to go in there, that these spaces could be dangerous to them. They could be putting other people in danger. So that's going to be a whole reset that we're going to have to do. But I think, that it's one thing to have a phone call with a GP, and I think they've been absolutely doing their best. But a lot of those sort of diagnoses for some pretty nasty things, they often come just incidentally through things that GPs will pick up when they can see you there in person and get a real feel for how you are and how you're moving around your body. And so I think that's just something that hasn't been able to be replicated in this kind of digital age. So we're all going to have to sort of have a bit of a reset and try and get our heads around the idea of going back to the doctor. But I think we're going to need some serious leadership from the government on this. They need to come out and say it's safe to go and do everything they can to build that capacity back up.
Gita, I mean, there's a similar story on the front of the Express. The dentist will see you in 3 years. That's a waiting time and a half to get to see a dentist. And of course, you need to be seeing your dentist every 6 months to make sure you keep on top of these things. But slightly away from that story, I mean, who do we blame for all of this, if not, the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister? We understand that COVID-19 has had to be the priority, but if we're learning this now, people in Whitehall have known about this growing problem for a lot longer.
Yeah, I think it's been a cumulative loss of perspective where we have thought that one killer disease that loomed very large, understandably, caught people's imagination, and some people who've never taken much interest in their own personal health, nor indeed in the NHS in the past, people that I know, some of them are friends of mine, have become completely obsessed and completely uncompromising about one particular thing called COVID. And they've forgotten that other things kill people day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. And it's going to be a very sobering thing to rediscover that. With dentistry, there have been issues in parts of the UK, rural areas of my native Wales, for instance, for a long, long time. It's about time somebody really got to grips and realised that not seeing the dentist for 3 years leads to all kinds of problems. You won't die of it, but you will have a much lower quality of life if your teeth start rotting in your mouth.
Sophia, take us inside the Mail, and I know, Guto, that you want to comment on this story as well. There's a suggestion that this faking of material perhaps wasn't limited to the one instance with Princess Diana.
Yes, this is dialing back the clock again to the 90s, the sort of lawless 90s now, as they must seem to us. So when we look back at media practices of that time, the tabloids had a real running over the phone hacking scandal and so on. But the BBC was seen to have been sort of above all of that. And it looks as though, I think these stories are saying people are digging up things from the past and essentially saying that, maybe the BBC was getting its hands a little dirty in other ways too. But there's clearly a very strong, very hot spotlight being shone on the BBC at the moment. I think it's right that there's an accountability in place. I'm a huge fan of the BBC. I think it's very important to our society and our democracy, but I don't think we should be afraid of scrutiny. So I think we can expect this story to run a little longer.
Guto, of course, before you went over to the dark side, you were yourself a BBC man. We had often very entertaining days standing outside Number 10 alongside each other. Look, did Did the Panorama team just miss the lesson where it pointed out that indulging in fraud is not an acceptable journalistic practice? What on earth was going on at the BBC at that time?
I'm still proud of those 18 years I spent in the BBC. I still think it's one of the best things about Britain, but it's not perfect. And clearly, in the case of Martin Bashir, bad stuff went on. And what is happening now is that just as that interest in him and that particular Diana story is slowly subsiding, you've got another example of somewhere where perhaps, we don't know, but one newspaper is now suggesting that perhaps other documents were forged in other investigations that actually put other people on the wrong side of something that was fundamentally unfair. I think what I read into this is, if you remember the phone hacking scandal at News International, one of the jobs I did was actually go into News International to try and help restore perspective on that. 99.9% of the fantastic journalists at the Times and the Sun and the Sunday Times had nothing to do with this, but they were all tarnished with the same brush. And I dare say the BBC enjoyed putting the boot in. And what the BBC is now experiencing is other people putting the boot in to the BBC in a big way. And reading that and some of the political commentary that's going on in tomorrow's papers, I think the BBC might be in for an extremely tough time over the next few weeks, and will have to be very sure-footed and reassuring in its response.
Sophia, let's talk about perhaps our top story on Sky, and frankly, straight out of the pages of, a fairly low-rent spy novel, but, a spy novel nonetheless. Belarus essentially forcing a Ryanair plane to divert to Minsk so that they could pop on and lift an opposition activist.
Absolutely extraordinary stuff. This is a passenger plane, with ordinary folks, coming home after a weekend in Athens, and the Belarus regime, which is a very brutal regime. It's not democratic, and it's, been sort of causing alarm bells right across Europe for some time. This is the latest brazen act. It shows that really they feel that they're beyond reproach. They've essentially committed a sort of state-sponsored hijacking of a plane with civilians on board, forced it to land. The plane's now on its way, but without an opposition activist who will almost certainly be jailed and could even be facing the death penalty. So this is just an extraordinary and very disturbing story, because Belarus is obviously on Europe's doorstep, which means it's on our doorstep. And, we all, passenger planes fly over Belarus airspace all the time. So it's something that I think is hitting very close to home. And the EU itself is scrambling to unite its institutions with a very strong message back. And there's all sorts of talks of new sanctions and closing down Belarus airspace, banning Belarus its own airline carrier as well. So I think these are really going to be crucial hours overnight, trying to get everybody on board for a coherent message. But I think that there is a sense that, does Belarus actually look at the EU and think they're a pushover? Is that what they're doing with this brazen act? Did they really think they won't face any retribution? So I think there's going to have to be a pretty tough response.
Welcome back to the press preview with me, Guido and Sophia, taking you through the stories. And Sophia, let's talk on the front of the Daily Mirror. Amber gamblers. I mean, despite the protestations from the government that everything was absolutely clear and that you shouldn't be travelling to amber list countries unless you had a really, really good reason, turns out 100,000 Brits have ignored that. Who'd have thunk it?
Well, I think we're all champing at the bit to go on holiday right now with this appalling weather that we've had. But, I think this is really the result of very mixed messages from the government. It hasn't been clear what the position is on amber countries. And there is a real question, what actually is the purpose of the amber countries? If you think there's a problem there, then maybe you want to have greater restrictions in place. And if there's not a problem there, then why wouldn't they be on the green list? And so I think, people have taken matters into their own hands, which has been a common theme in the pandemic, and they're jumping on the plane, because the fact is a lot of people are still working from home and they say, okay, sure, I've got to quarantine for a bit on the way home. But, that's something I can do, and it's absolutely worth it for 2 weeks in the south of France. So I don't think the government should be surprised that this is the consequence. But I think we're all just hoping that, it won't be too long until a lot more of these countries are actually on the green list, and we can move beyond this sort of in-out limbo situation that the amber list creates.
Look, just for my part, I just think it's been hilarious to see Londoners actually working out what a Scottish summer looks like for the first time. It's been brilliant. But hey, we have to look ahead to events in the summer next year, don't we, Guito? Boris is marrying Carrie. It'll be the wedding of the season, presumably.
Yeah, shock horror, because they are engaged. She's technically his fiancée, but I think the shock is when you read on from the headline is that it's not happening this summer. It's not happening for another year, which, considering they have a child together, not to mention a dog, you may think, why wait that long?
Well, Sophia, what do you make of all of this? I mean, I've had save the dates and all the rest of it, but is this perhaps, just simply put, them wanting to ensure that they can have the wedding in a sufficiently beautiful chapel with a sufficiently extensive guest list and a sufficiently extensive wine list, presumably, as well, perhaps even Australian wine, as we were discussing last hour?
I think it's partly because they know that things are going to be a bit touch and go over the summer, and if there was a potential that things need to be disrupted, they're going to have to be the ones leading by example. There's also, I'm sure they've got friends around the world who might not all be able to come this year, so I'm not surprised it's happening next year. I'm very happy for them. It's wonderful news, and I think, gosh, if my former sort of key advisor was going to be giving evidence this week, very much looking back to the past, I'd rather want a story looking to the future, wouldn't you?
Certainly that. I mean, Guito, obviously, as we introduce you every time you appear on this channel, former aide to Boris Johnson. I'm just having a look on the shelf to see if I can see a save the date. I mean, I haven't had mine yet. Have you?
Haven't had a save date yet. I think the Prime Minister's probably saving up the wedding. He's got to pay for the flat first and then save money for the wedding, and maybe that explains the delay.
I think you may well have a point in a very roundabout way there, Guito. Guito, Harry, Sophia Gaston, look, it's been great to have you on the show today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you both very much.